me chamo Gleice, que é leitor. O meu sinal é esse aqui. E eu sou diretora de educação do Instituto EUA. E em nome do Instituto, queria agradecer a presença de todas e todos vocês. Nós estamos dando início ao Seminário Transmutar. O Seminário Transmutar é um programa que vem sendo desenvolvido aqui no Instituto EUA de uma forma muito produtiva, muito interessante, porque é um seminário que já tem uma história na instituição, mas que essa é a primeira edição que ele integra todas as equipes e todas as áreas de conteúdo do museu. Então é um exercício, um gesto transdisciplinar de pensar alguns temas e algumas questões do presente a partir da educação, da música, das artes e da botânica. Estamos muito felizes de receber vocês. É a continuidade de um programa que se inicia na Semana de Ciência e Tecnologia, que aconteceu no mês de junho, onde nós tivemos a presença da bióloga Brigitte Batiste, que conversou conosco sobre o conceito de transmutar, numa programação que integrava também outras pessoas convidadas para pensar nessas questões e nesses conceitos, não só a partir dos formatos tradicionais de conferência, mas também de outros formatos artísticos, da comida e de outras formas de estar junto. E esse é o tema que nós elegemos para reunir todas nós aqui em torno desses 2 dias de atividade, que é modos de estar no mundo, gestos que conservam a vida, um tema a partir do qual o Instituto EUA quer pensar, quer dialogar e quer refletir nas interseções entre arte e natureza sobre problemas como o desenvolvimento, a sustentabilidade e um conjunto de epistemologias que são necessárias, porque tem questões e tem problemas, acho que eu falei problemas umas 5 vezes já aqui nesse 1 minuto, que nós precisamos enfrentar, para os quais nós precisamos partilhar e pactuar outras gramáticas. Então, gramáticas que não são necessariamente novas, que estão presentes aí em um conjunto de conhecimentos, por vezes, excluídos, inclusive, da sociedade, dos modos de se pensar a sociedade, que nós queremos reunir, um conjunto de saberes para que nós possamos nos reposicionar diante da vida na Terra, diante da vida em coletivo, e quando eu estou falando aqui em coletivo, pensando também nas diversas formas de existência. Então eu agradeço a todas as pessoas que aceitaram o convite para estar aqui conosco, o público, as pessoas que foram convidadas a dividir as suas experiências e os seus conhecimentos. Teremos 2 dias de conversas em diferentes formatos. Abrimos essa conversa hoje com uma conferência do Stefano, do Fred, que está conosco online, sendo debatida pelo Jorge, que eu apresentarei daqui a pouco, mas damos continuidade no dia com uma partilha, com a troca de experiência do Paulo Tavares e da Gabriela, que vão dividir conosco uma experiência deles como arquiteto, e também fecharemos o dia com a Josiane Jorge, que vai, a partir da comida, fechar essa conversa para que nós possamos experimentar esses temas com vários sentidos. Eu queria, então, apresentar formalmente as pessoas que abrem essa conversa. O Stefano Harney e Fred Moten, eles são autores do livro que foi traduzido no Brasil como Sobre Comuns, e também são autores do livro All Incomplete, ambos da Minor Composition, Media. Stefano é professor de Estética Transversal na Academy of Media Arts de Colônia, e Fred leciona nos departamentos de estudos da performance e literatura comparada da Universidade de Nova York. São amigos e parceiros de redação há 40 anos e vão conversar com a gente aqui sobre esse pensamento também produzido em parceria e tendo a amizade como base da escrita e da pesquisa. Jorge vai estar também conosco, mediando, criando as provocações e abrindo o debate dessa conversa. Jorge vem do Rio de Janeiro, negro indígena, neto de indígena chavante, aldeado e bisneto de negro escravizado, doutor em filosofia pela UFRJ, professor associado na Universidade Federal Fluminense, no Departamento de Artes e Estudos Culturais e no programa de pós-graduação em Estudos Contemporâneos das Artes. É líder do grupo de pesquisa CNPq, práticas estético-políticas na arte contemporânea, teórico e ativista no coletivo de ações e práticas estéticas políticas e procedimentos acadêmicos contrapedagógicos, 28 de maio, C28M, e é editor científico da revista Poieses. E, antes de passar a palavra para os nossos convidados, Japira nos propôs, está aqui conosco, Japira Pacochó, nos propôs abrir essa nossa manhã com um canto. Então eu passo para a Japira para fazer as aberturas do dia e desejo que tenhamos 2 dias muito frutíferos de conversa e de imaginação coletiva.
Essa é uma abertura, quando a gente vai fazer uma palestra, aí a gente faz essa abertura que é para poder todo mundo ficar em paz, todo mundo que vai assim, sobre abrir a mente da pessoa, né? A pessoa está inconsciente, ver essa, para mim eu falo reunião, né? Essa reunião que a gente está aqui com vocês. É uma honra de estar assim, apresentando o nosso povo pataxó. Isso aí, muito obrigado ao ele.
Bom dia. Muita alegria que eu estou aqui embebido depois do canto magnífico da Japira. Pessoa adorável que eu tive a oportunidade de conhecer essa semana aqui no convívio pré-seminário. Muito bacana. Estou muito feliz de estar fazendo a mediação da mesa de 2 pensadores que espero que estão se tornando amigos no pensamento e na vida, o Fred Moten e o Stefano, que, como mora perto da minha casa, de poder se encontrar algumas vezes para ter outras conversas. Acho que a gente está diante de 2 potências de pensamento que estão tendo, que de alguma maneira estão apresentando propostas muito interessantes ao nosso tempo presente. Acho que a gente vai poder ouvi-los e, em seguida das falas do Fred e do Stefano, eu faço algumas apreciações e passo aos nós que estamos aqui no seminário para vocês fazerem questões. Eu vou fazer a provocação em seguida. Eu acho que como o tempo já avança, eu vou passar a palavra para os nossos conferencistas. O Fred que fala primeiro online ou é o Stefano?
Como é que vocês preferem?
I guess it thought I'd be a little better for me with Stefano, so although I can't really hear him.
Agora.
Okay, Fred, I'm going to start. Maybe you hear me better now that I have the mic. Good morning, everyone. As you've noted, I'm speaking in English, but when we get to our discussion, of course, please feel free to speak. Pode falar português. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful for the way that the session opened. I'm really grateful to my new friend, Jorge, whose work I knew. And so when I discovered we would be here together, I was very excited. I would like to thank also, Chin, Vivian, everybody, Zhao, everyone who's been here and has been so great. And I also want to say that probably the reason that we're here has everything to do with our very generous and supportive publishers here in Brazil. We've been working with our friends at Ubu Books and Conferência now for a couple of years to get out our first book together, The Undercommons. But we've also been working with our friend Leo and Glax and Suas to publish All Incomplete in Portuguese, and now to publish a new smaller book called The Undercommons One More Time. And so I'd like to extend a special thanks to them, not only because of their generosity and all that they taught us about the Portuguese and Brazilian contexts, but also really because it's largely because of them that we feel now that we can have also a conversation with them. So we're very grateful to be here, and we're very interested to talk to you about our work, also in the context that we find ourselves here. We're very aware that this is a different context. We're very aware that this is also very often an uneven context. By which I mean that, of course, there is a kind of trade in intellectual ideas that is based on an attempt to perpetuate a kind of underdevelopment. Now, I don't think it succeeds at that. I know that it's and still, we are hopeful today to talk with you in a way where we reach ever greater friendship and solidarity and sense of what we can do together. So I would like to say a few things before I turn it over to Fred about our work in the most general sense for context. But we have other things to talk about, not only the urgent things of the moment, but also we would like to reflect on some of our newest work at some point, because it feels so appropriate as we're here in this tremendous institution of art here in Minas. Let me start with a few general comments about the origins and development of this book, The Undercommons, which has been really a gift for us because it's allowed us to come and speak to so many people in different situations. And this is not so much to do with it introducing some great turn of thought or some new concept that was so important. In fact, as you will notice with our concepts, they never hold still long enough to become important. But I think it captured something that was going on when it came out. And it had a lot to do with what was going on, especially in the United States, but also in the world at that moment. So the reason that people pick the book up is not to teach them something they don't know. It's more so they will say, that is exactly what I was thinking. And we wouldn't have it any other way. It feels a much better place and a way to start. And it couldn't be any other way because the book is just a compilation of all the people who taught us and all the people who taught to us and all the people who came before. In particular, it's in the American context, it feels important to us to tell you where we came from and when we came from. Our parents, and in particular my father and Fred's mother, were people of the late 60s and 70s in the United States, which means they were people of great and revolutionary commitments and actions. And we grew up in that world, but as kids, not as true participants yet. And of course, as you know, in the context of the global north, things began to shift after that. There was a right-wing turn, sometimes referred to as neoliberalism or neoconservatism. Doesn't matter for right now. Now we talk about it more in terms of the kind of crypto neo-fascism. But there's a way in which our heritage was not in sync with that. We didn't give up, we didn't shift, we didn't change. But there were some also problematic consequences to holding to us. And I would just mention a couple here, but one that is central is the relationship to the university. So for our parents, the university had two things were going on. On the one hand, something traditional. Get your kids to university. Send them away. That was the traditional half. And the other half was not that university. The next university, the one we want. And those were the social movements to change the departments, to change the curriculum in the United States, which were largely successful. And we know they were successful because there's such a huge backlash against them. But because of people who were on the streets, we had our first Black Studies program, our first Gender Studies and Women's Studies program, our first Queer Studies program, our Cultural Studies program, etc., etc. And so we were out of time in the university. It seemed like the university was getting better at a time when the world was actually becoming much more reactionary. And it took us a while to realize that, we couldn't relinquish our commitments simply because we seemed to have these sort of victories in the university. Because actually maybe they weren't victories. And gradually we began to see the degree to which we were being professionalized as part of the embrace of these victories. And the way in which that professionalism was not only undermining, but indeed even beginning to weaponize these victories against us. And so part of what came together in the Undercommons was me and Fred helping each other out of a situation, out of this professionalization, out of this faith in what we had accomplished, and out, most importantly, of the individuation is required to embrace institutionalism. So first, we were just trying to work ourselves out of the workplace and get it back to just simply being a workplace. It's a disenchantment. But then gradually we saw with every step another thing that was wrong. Another thing wrong in the university. Another thing wrong with the suppositions behind it. So eventually this led to the writing of at least some of the chapters of the Undercommons. Because we also turned to politics and other things. And I think, by the time it came out, there was a whole nother generation or two generations who didn't need us to say it. They were like, yeah, no kidding. This is a massive betrayal. But since we did say it, they said, look, see, like it says in the book. There are a lot of our colleagues who, can't really disagree with us, but they wish we never said it. And they don't even tell us that. You can just tell by the way they behave, but they kind of wish we never said it, which allows us to know, we were right. But it also brings up all these interesting problems, which exists also for us in the art world. One of the reasons they didn't want us to say it is that, for a lot of them, we're like, are you kidding me? I finally get here, and now you want to talk with it? Which is a perfectly understandable position, right? And the position that we can recognize in the art world. I'm going to say one more thing and then pass it over to I'm talking too much. Sorry. Gradually, and most importantly, for ourselves at least, we were able to say, okay, this is not about any more than situation. This is about recognizing the university as a workplace and I get my wage there. And as long as I can keep that in focus, I can concentrate on where we might practice something that really has a more revolutionary function. And so, by about halfway through the book, we realized the book wasn't about the university at all. It was already too late. I wanted to go back and rewrite half of them too late and try to start with the So it ends up sounding like it's about the university, but it's really not about the university at all. It's really about the abiding problem of institutions as machines, individuation, and as regulators and enclosures of what we want to keep. So with that, I'll pass over to Fred, and Fred, please take it in the direction or correct anything you want before we say.
I just would like to say good morning to everybody. And to thank the organizers and the interpreters and Jorge for making this conversation possible. I wish I could be there in person, but I'm also happy to be there virtually. It's an interesting phenomenon. I hear the interpreter translating pretty much as I speak. And it's like the sort of very fruitful and generative, but also disconcerting feeling of hearing myself. Oh no, don't fix it. I like it. Well, I guess in a way, it strikes me as a kind of object lesson for the theme of the gathering. The gathering is about how to sustain and foster life. And another way to consider that is that it's about how to sustain and foster difference. Which then means, trying to trying to enhance and to refine our ethical stance toward differences. Even the differences that appear to be internal to our own persons. So that the disconcerting feeling of hearing oneself speaking in another language is actually a way of attuning oneself to an actual concert that's bigger than. It's like you hear the other voices that are in your head, and you hear the other voices that are outside your head. And so I feel like I'm learning a lesson that I need to learn. So this is an experience that I wish I could make sure that everyone had. You could have like your own private translator walking around with you all the time. So, in a way that like estranges your voice at the same time as it redoubles your voice. Anyway, I guess the main thing I wanted to do was just to echo Stefano's comments and also his gratitude. One of the things that was very important for us as we began to publish the Undercommons and then we move on to All Incomplete, is that we met a dear friend and colleague named Manolo Callahan. And through Manolo, we were able to learn more about the philosophy of Ivan Illich. And we also became interested, especially in Ivan Illich's collaborations with Paulo Freire. And so a couple of terms from their work have become very important for us. One is the notion of what it means to be pilgrims of the obvious. And that what it entails is a kind of pilgrimage that is on the way to, because what it means, the obvious is on the most basic linguistic level, it just means to be on the way or in the way. And what we're attempting to do is to try to create an ever more close and attentive approach to the specificities of how we actually live. We're interested in how the people live. And we're interested in how the people survive and how the people subsist within the context of a brutal war against subsistence. It's a war against life and it's a war against difference. And it's a war against difference that is perpetrated in the name of a brutal form of individuation, in which liberalism in all of its vicious innovations is also structured in such a way as to try to preserve the brutalities that those innovations help to produce. So we find ourselves trying to write and trying to behave and to try to exercise our own friendship in the name of a preservation of difference against the force of individuation. So that's another reason why, again, what it means to learn to listen to other voices, particularly when those other voices trouble the simple distinctions between what's inside your head and what's outside your head. For us, is a kind of object lesson at the level of how we work together. I think we've learned to like what it means, and I mean Stefano and I, we've learned how to like what it means to not know. To not know when it's him talking or when it's me talking. When it's him writing or me writing. So I guess this is just the most basic way in which we try to mobilize our working together, both as a kind of, both in praise for the mechanics of our subsistence, and also as a militant defense of the mechanics of our subsistence. Anyway, I'll stop there for now. But again, thank you very much for letting me be there. I'm glad to be there even if I'm not really there.
Alô? Alô? Obrigado, Fred, obrigado, Stefano. Eu queria, antes de tudo, endossar as palavras do Fred, que foram muito interessantes e espirituosas, para dar um salve aos intérpretes, um salve aos tradutores, um salve a todas essas pessoas, aos editores, às editoras, aos intérpretes de livro, a todas as pessoas, na verdade, que fazem essa comunicação, essa viabilidade para nós nos encontrarmos em várias linguagens. Porque, no caso da filosofia e da poesia, a escolha das palavras são fundamentais. E eu queria também falar um pouquinho sobre isso, como uma espécie de provocação inicial para abrir para que vocês possam ter o prazer de conversar com o Fred e o Stefano. Duas coisas. A primeira coisa, eu queria falar que vocês desenvolvessem um pouco a ideia rapidamente, de subcomuns. Né? É uma ideia nova. Eu estou lendo há não tanto tempo e estou bem tomado por ela. Nesse debate entre contemporâneo. Como pensar a nossa sociedade hoje a partir dessa temática? Eu acho que seria uma provocação interessante para abrir o conceito. Né? Eu também gostaria de destacar que há um livro que não foi citado aqui, chamado Tudo Incompleto, pela Galeria Edições, que é um livro que eu estou terminando de ler, que é uma pequena obra-prima, de não tão fácil nem difícil acesso, aquela coisa de meio do caminho, mas que é um desafio ao nosso tempo presente pensar em completude. O que significa isso tudo incompleto? Eu queria que vocês fizessem um pouco a relação dos subcomuns com essa obra traduzida pela Galeria. E, por fim, sem para perder o mote, já fazendo a continuidade a esse salve aos intérpretes, tradutores e editores, lembrando que, ao final dessa conversação, vai ter um lançamento de mais um livro dos nossos queridos Fred e Stefano, né? Mais uma vez, Subcomuns, Poética e Aplicabilidade, pela Galeria Edições, que terão, inclusive, autógrafos aqui, logo ali em seguida. Okay? Então, eu queria que vocês pudessem falar livremente sobre essa temática, abrindo, que é um debate realmente importante. Vocês falam da universidade, A universidade brasileira, você já percebeu, Stefano, ela é muito diferente da universidade estadunidense. A forma como ela se dá, os impactos das políticas públicas na nossa universidade. Eu até brincava com eles ali, né, que a gente tem ali uma grande amiga em comum, um amigo em comum, que é a Denise Ferreira da Silva, e eu conheci a Denise em 1982, quando eu entrei na Universidade de Filosofia, e a gente se conheceu basicamente porque nós éramos as únicas pessoas negras na Universidade Federal Fluminense. Ela fazia Ciências Sociais e eu fazia Filosofia no IFIX naquele momento. E ela brinca comigo que eu sempre denuncio a idade dela quando eu falo isso, mas é uma denúncia que eu acabo fazendo parte desse processo. Essa universidade mudou muito, mas ainda precisa mudar muito mais. Acho que a gente precisa usar justamente esses tipos de categoria, tal quais eles estão pensando, né? Associados, negridade, subcomuns, como essas categorias podem ser importantes para a gente chegar, de alguma forma, dar movimento às coisas que já estão em movimento. Fazer esse movimento acelerar mais. E o que nós ganhamos hoje ainda é muito pouco.
Thank you, Jorge, for these comments, and thank you for what you're saying about all incomplete. We're happy that it also can be part of the conversation. Yes, I think we're both aware of the differences in the university a lot. In fact, when we were first talking about translating the Undercommons, Bolsonaro was in power, and there was a correct sense, I think, that the universities were not only under siege, but they were, to some extent, a refuge from his power. And so maybe at that time it seemed strange to translate and publish a kind of condemnation of the institution, right? And this is true. We're in different kinds of times around these things, and all, you know, and yet. I don't need to tell you all the problems with the Brazilian university, right? And so there are places where we still can talk to each other about this, even if our systems are different and even our moments are different. And we'll probably stay different in that sense. And as Fred's saying, that's something for us to try to proliferate, not try to harmonize, I would say. This is equally true around the questions of blackness. It's very apparent, if you spend time in Brazil, that there are differences from the US. I feel it in the way that I see black people form families in Brazil. I see it in the way people socialize. There are many things. I see it and I don't recognize the patterns I know from the United States and even from the Caribbean. These are true differences that will, you know, not only need to be respected, but again, you know, promoted. And then there's the other side of this, which is something also, of course, that we learned from our great friend Denise. And here I feel I have to quote another great figure, Jack Nicholson, the actor, who in The Departed says, what I'm saying here today is, when you're facing a loaded gun, what's the difference? And that is what I would say about the question of blackness. There's tons of differences, but at the end of the day, there's a loaded gun pointed at black people in both places. That has to be the basis for doing something together. Right? Fred, you want to get in?
I'm afraid it's very difficult because I can hear the translator translating Stefano into Portuguese, which I don't really understand, but I can't hear Stefano, so I have no idea what you just said. But
Well, I
but I
do.
will try to say, I guess I'll just try to respond directly for his question about regarding
Yeah,
Tunisian and also blackness in the undercommons. So I think I've known Denise and worked with her of 20 years. And have been aware of her work for longer, and she's been a profound sort of guiding force for our work, and also and also has just been a very great and stalwart friend. And also has been a colleague of both of ours in different moments in her career in different universities that we've worked at. So I would say that one of the things that her work really made both necessary and possible for us is to make sure that we always understood and always attempt to understand blackness as a global condition. And I mean condition on a couple of different levels. Condition both as in the sense of an effect of certain historical forces. Forces that she illuminates under the rubrics of violence, and also value, but also a condition of an alternative as a necessary condition for the ongoing production of the alternative. And this sort of double valence of blackness it sort of undermines the normal physics and metaphysics of cause and effect. This is the force that we're trying both to understand and to unleash. The undercommons, like blackness, because it's inseparable from blackness, it's not a place and it's not a location and it's not an identity, but it's a force that is brought about in the world both as the denial of identity, as the denial of place, as the denial of location, but also as the ongoing refusal is the refusal of identity, the refusal of place, and the refusal of location. And we just admire and are grateful for Denise, who helps us to walk and think along this pilgrimage, that is committed to what it is to live this double edge.
Ok, Fred? A gente pode começar a fazer a ampliar a conversa aqui. Eu só queria falar mais uma coisinha só em relação à questão aqui tratada. É que as questões sobre o povo preto no Brasil são terríveis. Essa ideia já estão vinculada primeiro pelo Aquile, que na verdade vem de Foucault, né? A necropolítica e o extermínio do povo preto, mas a gente sempre tem que articular no Brasil a questão da negridade, dos negros com as questões indígenas, porque o extermínio no Brasil é um extermínio de mão dupla. Né? Eu, enquanto um homem negro indígena, assim, isso para mim é uma coisa que me apetece. Então a gente sempre tem que vincular, porque é uma realidade com certeza muito distinta daquela que é estadunidense. Mas é interessante fazer essas trocas e ver como a gente consegue criar realmente focos, modos e meios aos quais possamos resistir e mais, contra-atacar. Né? Porque nós queremos talvez bem mais do que retomada e reparação, porque a reparação não é possível, é irreparável. Se vocês quiserem começar a fazer questões. Eu levo o microfone?
Dá para me ouvir?
Agora está ótimo.
Bom dia a todas as pessoas. Muito obrigada, Fred, Stefano, Jorge. É um prazer estar aqui com vocês. Meu nome é Luciane. A minha pergunta é bem ordinária. Eu sempre tive, há um tempo tenho tido curiosidade em entender como Fred e Stefano construíram a sua aliança. Aqui no Brasil, nós, pessoas negras, temos lutado, ou temos gingado muito para entender como poderemos e podemos construir essa aliança que exige muito comprometimento, exige talvez muita coragem. Tem um momento aqui no Subcomuns, no novíssimo livro, que vocês contam um momento de certo curiosidade ao lidar com a ideia de self-defense dos panteras negras, né? Com a ideia de autodefesa dos panteras negras. Né? Então eu queria que vocês falassem um pouquinho sobre isso, esse encontro de Fred e Stefano e a noção de autodefesa dos panteras negras para uma certa leitura da história de vocês e que eu entendo que é também uma leitura da nossa história. Obrigada.
Fred, I don't know if you can hear me in English, but I'll start, okay? And then I'll turn it over to you. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right, cool. Thank you for that question. I think, again, some of the context is important, in addition to what we're trying to do with each other and with others. And again, I'm speaking as an outsider, just observing. But it strikes me that there has been some different phenomena going on. In Brazil, one thing that I was struck with, which is maybe not as common as it was when I first started to encounter Brazilians, by which I mean white people, because they're the ones who leave the country. There was a claim on Africanity, a claim not exactly on blackness, but certainly on African heritage, that everybody in Brazil embraced, and it was part of everybody's culture. Now, I leave it to you to evaluate that. But we don't have that in the U.S. You don't have white Americans walking around talking about the U.S. is really a black nation, right? We prefer just to steal the shit and keep quiet about it, right? So it's a slightly different, like many of these things, there's these different dynamics going on, right? So when we both became students of Black Studies, we did it under the conditions where everything around us is always hostile to Black Studies. There's no moment really of embrace or ownership, etc. It's always all the time hostile. And when things are hostile, your tendency is to try to fall back on the tools that you have to protect yourself. And this is where I think it might tie to the second part of your question. And unfortunately, those tools are the tools of liberalism. This is my work, this is my body, this is my career, this is my experience, this is my heritage. Well, these are self-defense, but unfortunately, they're liberal self-defenses. Sometimes they're absolutely necessary. There's moments where you've got to insist that you actually have a body, as much as that's bullshit, right? You have to survive, right? But we were doing this in the academy. We were falling back on, because there's such a hostility to Black Studies, we were falling back on these liberal defenses. And so what we began to say to each other is we got to get ourselves out of this, because this works exactly against where we come from, what we've been taught, who mentored us, etc., to use these kind of liberal and individualist defenses of our work. And this is partly where our understanding of the Black Panthers comes in, particularly their full and original name, as a party for self-defense. They understood that there was a collective wealth in that Oakland Black community that needed to be defended. That was the true and full meaning of self-defense for them. It wasn't guns. You read any of the testimonies, that's the first thing they tell you. Self-defense was not us following the police around. Self-defense was because we had something to protect. So then rather starting from the position that they needed something from somebody else, they're starting from the position that someone else is coming to take their stuff correctly. So, right? So Fred and I needed to start to say to ourselves, we have what we want. We need to start wanting what we have, instead of wanting something else from an institution or something else from the profession. And then we realize that we have to get out of this individual defense, and this means this is a violent process. And we make a distinction, because we want to talk about that as a violent process, between violence and brutality. Violence is the process that occurs when you get out of this fantasy of being an individual, of being a subject, of believing that you're going to be able to defend yourself on that basis and thrive on that basis, or even to exist on that basis, because it's impossible for anybody to live on their own. It can be violent to be taken out of those things. And that's why we want the word for that purpose. Brutality, on the other hand, is the absolute enforcement of that individualism. That is separating you out and killing you. That's brutal, but that's not violence. Violence is a process that we see at work in the world that is the return to entanglement, to gathering, the return to a state in which we cannot be clear what voices are inside our head and outside our head. And so for us, once we understood that we had what we needed, all we had to do was begin to think how we do a collective self-defense. And that's where these started to work for us. And since then, as Fred said, it's worked better and better. We don't fall into individual defenses or into senses of who owns what or what's what or even who's what. And it's, we don't, we're not people who like to give out, advice or make policy prescriptions or any of that stuff you get, from people who get into these kinds of, university positions too often. But the one thing we always say to people is, don't try to do shit by yourself, even if it seems like, you have every right, to this or to that. Just don't try to do it by yourself, because you will undermine everything that you're trying to do. And that's what we've tried to live by in these last couple decades, at least. So thank you for your question. I'm going to give Fred an opportunity to address it as well.
Would she like me to address the question?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's funny. I mean, I appreciate the question very much. I get the feeling like it's a question that's on lots of people's minds, but no one ever really asks it in a direct way. And because no one ever really asked it in a direct way, I feel like I don't really have a chance to kind of think it through, because thinking about it is sort of coterminous with response. So I should say, with regard to the Black Panthers, in my experience with Panthers was visceral and personal before it was academic. My mother was a school teacher, and it was her students who formed the Black Panther Party in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I grew up. So when I think about the Black Panthers, I don't think about, in the first instance, I'm not thinking about Huey Newton or Bobby Seale or Eldridge Cleaver, who of course were the famous leaders of the National Party. And I don't even think about, some of the other really important figures, Ray Brown or Fred Hampton. The people I think of are folks that you've never heard of. So I think of Tommy Smith and Jeannie Giles, because they were the Black Panther Party in Las Vegas. And those are the people that I looked up to when I was 67 years old, when they would let me sit in on the meetings that they were having in my mom's basement. Before I knew anything about the party in a kind of academic way. So the lessons I learned from the Panthers are lessons that I learned from them. And I think those lessons, I could sort of boil them down into three main points. To not be scared of white people, to not care what white people think, and to not want what white people have or what white people want. And it is because of those three lessons that I've been able to be friends with Stefano for 40 years. that's the sort of simplest way to put it. I think what those lessons allowed me to do, and have allowed us to do together, is to understand that that in some fundamental way, the sad and brutal and imperial and colonial criminally thievish space eating and space occupying and resource extracting entities that we call white people are in fact abstractions from a much more fundamental physical force called whiteness. To consider white people as an epiphenomenon of whiteness is both a way of understanding the weakness of white people as well as understanding how the brutality that they perpetrate are effects of that weakness. And we understand that, and we try to put it in its proper perspective. But it is ultimately whiteness in all of its guises that is the force that we have to try to fight. So, I guess, the older I get, the less I think about it. And I understand white people as little units of behavior. I deal with that behavior as it comes. And I guess I'm happy to say that that behavior has never come to me in the guise of Stefano Harney. And I hope that for him, that behavior has never come in the guise of Fred Moten.
Você quer complementar alguma coisa? Você quer falar mais alguma coisa?
Thanks, Fred. No, I've never seen that unit in you. Do we have time for another question? Tem tempo?
Tem, né? Tem.
Eu vou fazer a questão em português, vou apresentar aqui. Talvez a questão devolva a gente para uma conversa que já estamos tendo, mas que me parece importante seguir tendo, e talvez até de forma repetitiva, especialmente no contexto do Brasil. E tem uma imagem que o Fred articulou, To not know what is he talking and what I'm talking. Não saber o que ele está falando e o que eu estou falando. Como uma imagem, parte desse trabalho de defender a diferença. E eu fiquei bastante interessado por essa imagem, né, porque era uma imagem de relativa indiferenciação entre duas partes. E se a gente pensar na maneira como o liberalismo articula a noção de diferença, e como essa noção de diferença tem sido fundamental para o modo como as universidades e também os museus e o sistema de arte tem operado, a diferença vem sempre acompanhada, é como se a diferença fosse, na verdade, unidades existenciais separadas uma da outra, né? Então a diferença ela sempre funciona dentro desses sistemas como identidade. E na verdade que desde o começo o que o trabalho tenta articular, os undercommons e toda a conversa que tenta articular é justamente um escapatório disso. Eu acho que isso já foi articulado aqui de diversas maneiras, inclusive na resposta à última pergunta. Mas eu gostaria de devolver, porque me parece que a maneira como no Brasil a gente pensa essa defesa da diferença ainda está, de alguma forma, profunda, não só no Brasil, né? Essa conversa é muito contexto. Mas como esse é um contexto que me afeta particularmente, eu quero propor pensar nele. Mas eu queria propor, talvez, que vocês, tentassem elaborar ainda um pouco mais, né, nessa ideia de uma diferença que não passa necessariamente pela ideia de identidade, que não passa necessariamente pela ideia de que existem unidades distintas, e que a diferença, e que defender a diferença é defender que muitas dessas unidades existam enquanto unidades num determinado espaço, mas precisamente criar uma situação na qual eu já não sei quem sou eu, quem está falando, se sou eu que estou falando ou se é alguém que está falando. Porque eu acho que essa é uma imagem particularmente interessante, porque até na forma como as respostas que têm aparecido ao discurso que estão fazendo, me parece que ainda tem, para até pensar o contexto brasileiro é muito diferente do contexto estadunidense, de fato mas é quase como se a gente tentasse insistir na unidade de cada coisa, né? E não no modo como as coisas se contaminam e se atravessam de muitas maneiras. Assim. Então eu queria talvez propor insistir um pouco mais ainda nessa ideia de como pensar uma diferença que confronta, né, a ideia de individuação, a ideia de individualização, e o que, como de fato a gente pode pensar nessa violência, né, de sair das figurações do sujeito, das figurações da unidade de ser.
Enfrenta. Sim.
Well, I just will say quickly, of all the lessons that we have learned from, and that we're also learning with Denise de Silva, the most important one is a notion that she elaborates and the notion is difference without separate. The way Stefano and I think about it is that difference is the radical disruption of the individual unit before the fact of the individual unit. And in a way,
what we're attempting to do is to understand the difference, not by way of the normative terms of order of political economy. And that phrase, terms of order, comes from Robinson. So we refuse to accede to the metaphysical foundations of the terms of order. And we're more interested in trying to understand the vision of our sociality. So that, you know, that's part of the reason why I was belaboring the point that emerged as a function of this sort of beautiful and generous act of translation that we're all sort of both witnessing and involved in. This way that the different languages of thinking and being with one another across linguistic divides. It's substantiation of difference without separability. It's a refusal of the terrible fiction of the individual voice. And this is what Stefano and I have always been trying to do when we work together. And what we learned is that every instance of translation that we're involved in, and which allows us to be with and think with and talk with our friends we didn't even know we had. It's like a kind of living practice of refusal and individuation.
Você vai responder? Vai responder a Jota?
Sim. I can only echo everything that Fred said, which is also anticipated in everything that Jota asked us. Of course, it raises the question of how to multiply the kinds of practices that help you to get out of the destructive fiction of the individual, who, after all, is the prime home of difference as a unit, right? I'm an individual, there's no one like me. Difference is reduced to a single unit, which of course is then the first moment of its tradability and its equivalencies. And of course, that brings us around, finally, to the art world. And to work. The art world, yeah, cut striking. And the questions of what we do about this thing that so many of us find ourselves in. I was lucky to be able to read some of Jorge's book last night. And I was very interested in some of the ideas that are put forth by O Colectivo, 28
28 de maio.
de maio, sim, de maio.
28
de maio. And one of them is this idea of art without the artist. Because of course the artist becomes a kind of chemical agent for taking art and turning it into something individual, attributable, tradable, etc., etc. And it was a great idea and put me in mind a lot of some of the things that Fred and I have been talking about around the art world. And made me ask the question, what if in addition to needing art without the artist, we need art without art? What if we need to think about the larger alienation of the very idea of art, which would not only maybe take us somewhere, but in a quantum way, also take us somewhere back, to places in time where it would be nonsensical to speak of art, because what you had instead was aesthetic social practice. You had an aesthetic society. You had a fully integrated sense of the relationship between aesthetic and ways of living. And it may be that we really have to hurry up and get back and get forward to art without art, because the changes that are beginning to happen now in the art world are things that we would really, I think, ignore at our peril, at the risk of sounding now, again, like I'm giving advice, but I'm really only giving it to myself. Fred and I have been working on this with our great friend Jun Lee now for the last year or so. And many of these thoughts are his as well, I think. You know, for a long time we spoke, especially in the capitals of capital, you know, Paris or London or whatever else, about the financialization of the art world, right? About how much money is in the art world. Oh, well, the art world has more money than Hollywood, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we spoke about the other side of that, you know, the side in which, despite all this money in the art world, most people in the art world work for free, whether they're artists or whether they're interns. Oh, sorry, I was afraid of the speaker. Whether they're artists or whether they're interns or curators or gallerists, etc. If they're not working for free, they're often virtually working for free and almost always precarious, because there's a massive reserve army of labor in the art world just waiting to take your job. Right? But speaking about that financialization of the art world, now, with the help of Jung, Fred and I are starting to say to ourselves, you know, that was really a metaphor or an analogy. I get those confused. It wasn't really true, is the point. It just was like that. The art world wasn't financialized because art and artists were not and have not been up to now fully liquid. They've not been up to now fully fungible in places where we want them to be fungible. And what that means is that the real world of finance has yet to arrive in the art world. What we call the world of finance currently are rich private investors and a few individual corporations and institutions that are investing in art the way they might invest in an old bottle of wine. But there's so much money in this art world that there was no way it was going to be left to these amateurs, because that's what museums are when it comes to finance. They're amateurs, you know, no offense. That's what most rich people are too, as amateurs. And this is not me talking, this is the way a hedge fund understands them, right? These are 19th century bourgeois capitalists to them, you know. They have no place at this moment, right? So if you ever were mad at a collector, don't worry, he's got it coming, or she does, right? Because to the hedge funds and the big investment funds, this is too much money to be left alone in the hands of these amateurs. Right? And so they need to find a way to make art and the artists fully convertible, instantly exchangeable for money, and most importantly, instantly bundled, because once they can bundle it, put it in with other assets, they can securitize it. And once they securitize it, they can begin to introduce all kinds of risks to make money. And of course, the whole point about those risks, as we've seen elsewhere in the world of finance, is they're not actually risky to them. They're risky to us. Right? If you remember the housing crisis and the financial crisis, it started in the US, etc. They were loading up risk. They all did fine. We got screwed. And this is coming to the art world. They're going to find ways to make art fully liquid so they can be easily bundled in with bonds, with stocks, with other forms of investment that are currently completely liquid. Now, how are they going to do this? Well, sorry, Fred, I'm going on a bit here, but I'll stop in a second. This is something that we still have to speculate and explore and watch out for, but we see parts of it beginning to emerge. For instance, with the ideas around the social value of art. The social value of art is a way to begin to think about, how you could standardize a value. It's also a way to begin to think about how you could then rate and value that contribution so that you could load it up with debt. And then once you have enough debt, you have complete convertibility because you have the finance world right inside there. But they will also have to do that by creating people from the investment banks and people from the hedge funds who can assign these values. Because if you think about it, the hedge fund doesn't go into the Ford Motor Company and say to the Ford Motor Company, how much you guys worth, right? They make that decision themselves. They send in their little smart-ass guys who run around and make the determination. Now, they take in a lot of advice, which is exactly what they'll do in the art world. And guess who'll be giving the advice? Me, right? But I'll be giving it to a banker, right, who will make the ultimate assessment on the value of the art of the institution or the artist to allow for the introduction of debt, allow for the introduction of certification, and to allow for the introduction of securitization, which along the way will make this art world even more risky for us, even more precarious, even more full of the kinds of twists and turns we don't need when we're trying to do our work. So whatever we do, whether it's art without the artist, or art without art, or something that somebody else is coming up with right now that I don't even know.
Print our money. Print our money.
Print our own money, wherever it might be. It seems like it's an urgent question for all of us. Because once that is introduced, we will have the true reign of indifference. Because that's how capital reigns, utter indifference. It uses difference, but it's utterly indifferent at the same time to that difference. And that will be a sad day in a world where, all we have left is that we love the stuff. Anyway, I'm going to stop there now that I depressed myself. Fred, I don't know if you heard that in English or if you want to add anything.
Ok? Bom, infelizmente a conversa está ótima, mas a gente vai ter que terminar essa primeira conversa, já que abriu o seminário. Eu queria agradecer especialmente aos dois pensadores, autores, parceiros, para escrever em parceria realmente é algo inusitado, difícil, vencer o próprio ego, vencer a si mesmo e criar uma parceria. Eu também escrevo em parceria. Eu sei o quanto isso tem que inibir nossas fantasias, nossos pequenos narcisismos. É bem difícil. Quero agradecer a Moten, a organização do evento, a todos que estão aqui trabalhando, os trabalhadores que estavam aqui no sol para viabilizar esse processo, aos nossos queridos transcritores, transcriadores, que viabilizaram a possibilidade da passagem do português para o inglês, do inglês para o português. Agradecer a Grace Kelly, agradecer a Marina, Mariana, agradecer a todos que aqui, ao João, todos os organizadores. E continuemos o evento, lembrando que o novo livro de Fred Moten e Stefano Harney está ali à venda para vocês levarem autógrafos. Muito obrigado, boa tarde e o evento continua.